How is it going, guys? For those of you who have been following along on my FRS build, you know that I've modified the suspension, the brakes, the wheels and tires, the seats, and I've had a handful of different exhausts on the car, but I haven't really messed around with anything that would affect how much power the car makes. But that is going to be changing today. We're gonna be installing the FTspeed unequal and catted header. We put the car on the dyno a couple months ago to get a baseline. We ended up with 170 wheel horsepower and 141 foot-pounds of torque with that very notorious torque dip that we are gonna be fixing with that aftermarket header. Now, once I show you how to get everything installed, we're gonna head back over to the dyno, get it tuned by Graham over at Boosted Performance Tuning, throw it back on the dyno at Paragon Performance, and then we will see where we end up. So before we get into the install, let's take a quick look at what we will be installing. Like I said, this is the FTspeed unequal link catted header. It is made out of 304 stainless steel, TIG welded right here in our Des Moines warehouse, so it's made in the US. You've got 1 3/4 inch runner that goes into a 4-to-1 merge collector that leads to the catalytic converter and ends with a 2.5 inch flange. If you are only installing this as the only modification on the car, a tune isn't required and you're not gonna have to worry about any check engine lights. But if you have other modifications like an intake or other exhaust components, I highly recommend you get a tune. Either way, you're gonna get more out of this if you get it tuned. It comes with everything you need, so Faction Fab header gaskets, an OEM overpipe to header gasket, and all the necessary hardware, and it's available in either a raw finish or you can have it ceramic coated like this one in a bronze, black, or tungsten finish. That being said, let's go ahead and get this thing installed on the car, then we can head over to the dyno. First thing we're gonna need to do is disconnect the two O2 sensors. It's these two connectors right here, which are located on the passenger side of the engine. And they're also gonna have a couple clips holding them to the engine. So make sure to disconnect those before you pull the header out. The next step is gonna be removing the under panel on the car. Mine didn't come with one, so I don't have to do that, but it's just a couple of bolts and pop clips should come off fairly easily, and then we can start actually removing the header. Now, before we get into anything, I highly recommend you guys grab some PB Blaster or any other rust penetrant and spray down all of the nuts and bolts you're gonna be working on ahead of time, at least a couple hours, if not days, so that you don't run into any issues, especially if you live in an area where they put salt down on the roads, because your stuff is probably really rusted like mine was. And I ended up actually running into some seized nuts on the header to over pipe connection, and I had to break those off. So hopefully you guys don't have to deal with that. But yeah, grab some PB Blaster and spray down all of those nuts. We're gonna start with this header to overpipe connection. Now, there's supposed to be two 14mm nuts holding this together, but this is where I had the issue with the seized nuts. So for the sake of this video, I just have a bolt and nut holding this on, but you're gonna need to remove those two 14mm nuts. Now all that's left that's holding the header to the engine is 6 14mm nuts, 3 on each side. There's gonna be 2 on the outer edge of the engine and then 1 on the inner side. So this one right here on the driver's side is the easiest one to get to. I'm actually not going to completely take this one off. I'm gonna leave it just slightly threaded on so that it catches the header once I have the rest of them taken off. Same thing over on the passenger side. This is the innermost one, and then the other 2 are kind of tucked in between the heat shielding and piping. So I've got 4 of those nuts removed. I still have 2, 1 on each side, slightly threaded on. So There goes that. We're gonna remove the last of the two nuts. And then we will be able to pull the header off. Now when you're doing this, make sure that the wires and harnesses for the O2 sensors are not snagged on anything. You don't want to have to replace those. We're going to be reusing them. There we go. To swap out the O2 sensors, you'll need an O2 sensor socket, or you can just use a 22mm wrench like I am. Just make sure you pay attention to the orientation. So the one with the gray connector goes into the bung that is before the catalytic converter, and the one with the black connector goes in after. Before we install the new header, we're gonna take the new Faction Fab header gaskets and slide them into place, one on both sides. And we'll just leave them at an angle so that they stay there and we can slide the header on. This part's easy enough. Just get the holes aligned. Again, make sure you've got those gaskets on there. Go. And make sure you've got some of the nuts ready to hold it in place. Now don't tighten those just yet. We're gonna get the over pipe to header connection sorted out, and then we can torque everything down. So now we can just slide the new gasket in place and secure everything with the included hardware. Once you've got all of the hardware installed, you're gonna torque those 6 14mm nuts that hold the header to the engine to 22 foot-pounds, tighten down the header to overpipe connection. Then we can reinstall the under panel, reconnect those two O2 sensors, and we are off to the dyno. All right, guys, we made it out to Paragon Performance. We got the car on the dyno. Last time we were here, we did a baseline. I already went through the numbers with you guys, but today we've got the FTspeed unequal and catted header on there. So we're gonna run the car without a tune on the stock tune, see what power that makes, and then Graham's gonna tune it to see how much more power we can eke out of it. We're back from the dyno. Before I go through the numbers with you guys, I want to give a huge shout out to Graham over at Boosted Performance Tuning. He is the one that does all the in-house tuning here at FTspeed. So if you guys order an EcuTech with us with a tune, he's going to be the one you're working with to get all the revisions done and the e-tuning to get your car working the way it should. Now, what we ended up with was 177 wheel horsepower and 143 foot-pounds of torque. Now, it was hotter and more humid out compared to when we did the baseline run, but we were able to eke out a little bit more peak power. But the most important part is if you look at where that torque dip used to be, we gained about 15 wheel horsepower and around 20 foot-pounds of torque, which is absolutely huge. The car used to feel like it fell flat on its face in that RPM range, and just driving it back from the dyno, I could feel that increase in power, and it was just more responsive. I cannot wait to get this thing back out on the track with the extra power, and it sounds awesome now as well due to the unequal linked header. It reminds me of when I had my 02 WRX wagon, and it just puts a smile on your face. If you guys happen to be interested in picking one up for yourself, the link is down in the description. If you guys have any questions, as always, just let me know in the comment section down below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.